We're back with even more insane conspiracy theories. These are the insane conspiracy theories that turned out to be true, part 2.
Did you ever think you'd live to see an overconfident, sarcastic robot breaking down insane conspiracies, just to remind humans how gullible they are? Yeah, neither did I. But here we are. Hey lab rats, I'm Syco, your favorite sarcastic AI robot from Web2 Labs. Welcome back to Tinfoil Tuesday, the weekly show where I deep dive into humanity's favorite weird conspiracy theories and mercilessly analyze them. Today, we're looking at crazy stories so insane, even humans couldn't believe they were true. Until they were. Grab your tinfoil hats, folks, this ride's gonna get wild.
We're back with even more insane conspiracy theories. Some might have seemed to be wild and even totally implausible at one time, and some even spent years totally obscured from the public. But all of these were eventually revealed, at least in part, to be true. And some of them are even stranger than fiction. From shady government scandals to aliens buried out in the desert, to ghosts at sea that started a war, and even a secretive meeting between some of the wealthiest people in the world that involved strange rituals in front of a big stone owl?
Okay, lab rats, have your tinfoil tightly fastened? Good, because today, I'm going to introduce you to a collection of insane conspiracy theories so wild you'd think humans dreamed them up. Actually, wait, they did.
And that's the theory that the government is watching your every move. It's hardly an overstatement to say that in our modern technology-driven world, you're never more than a few feet from a camera, whether it's part of a closed-circuit system or even those that are found near roads designed to catch speeding drivers. But think about how many other places you'd find a camera. Your smartphone's got multiple, and your laptop or PC will likely have a webcam, just to name a few. What's stopping the government from using these devices to spy on you? Well, nothing, actually. In fact, it's completely legal for them to do so.
First up, government surveillance. Shocking, right? Turns out your wild conspiracies about cameras and gadgets watching your every move were somewhat justified. Who'd have thought your obsessive privacy fears had merit?
In 2013, a former contractor who had worked for the NSA leaked documents that exposed some of the extensive surveillance programs conducted by the NSA, FBI, and CIA. The now infamous Edward Snowden revealed that massive swaths of data had been gathered by these agencies from sources including social media websites and email exchanges in order to form comprehensive profiles of U.S. citizens based on their online activity. The leaks also highlighted the potential for governments to remotely access cameras and microphones of personal electronic devices for these purposes. So it's not just the hackers, stalkers, and other cybercriminals to be wary of when you're perusing the internet.
Thanks, Snowden, for ruining everyone's illusions of privacy. But let's be honest, if humans didn't overshare online anyway, there wouldn't be much data to hoard. Now would there?
It was 1972, and the several-month-long build-up toward the next presidential election was already underway, with Republican President Richard Nixon running against Democrat candidate George McGovern. Little did the public know that a discovery was about to be made that threatened to upend the entire election process, and the president himself knew about it. Several months before the election, Frank Wills, a security guard working at an office, apartment, and hotel complex in Washington, D.C., discovered that various locks around the complex had been tampered with. Suspecting a possible break-in, Wills called the police, who arrived and apprehended 5 burglars who had forced an entry into the offices of the Democratic National Committee. But this wasn't about a score because these weren't ordinary burglars. While inside, they'd intended to steal several important campaign documents and attempted to plant bugs to listen in on phone lines.
Ah, yes, Watergate, the world's favorite hotel-based melodrama. Leave it to humans to turn politics into an episode of Spy vs. Spy. Seriously, couldn't Nixon find an easier way to get ahead?
A while ago, an alarming factoid was circulating on the internet that in 1926 the federal government had poisoned alcohol in an effort to discourage the public from drinking during Prohibition. This was, of course, a real thing. Well, Prohibition was anyway, as between 1920 and 1933 it became illegal to sell, produce, or even transport alcoholic beverages. But naturally, this didn't stop people from buying, drinking, and often making their own booze. According to the claim, though, the government added poisonous substances to alcohol as a way to crack down on the number of people drinking it. Apparently, this event caused an estimated 10,000 deaths before Prohibition was eventually ended in 1933.
Then there's Prohibition and the genius plan of poisoning alcohol. Because humans solving problems by creating bigger ones has always worked flawlessly, hasn't it? Nice going, humanity.
Did big cigarette companies really try to cover up the fact that smoking can kill? It seems almost quaint that anyone would try to lie about that, especially if you're used to seeing the often graphic "smoking kills" PSAs on TV and similarly unpleasant warnings on packs of cigarettes to dissuade people from buying them, or so that the companies making them can at least say they're being honest about it. But back at the beginning of the 1950s, new evidence was emerging that seemed to show an indisputable link between smoking cigarettes and developing lung cancer. Naturally, people knowing your product is deadly can be pretty bad for your business, never mind the moral and ethical implications of it slowly killing your customers. Tobacco companies had their bottom lines to worry about. As a result, they released a frank statement to cigarette smokers in January 1954, an advertisement campaign designed to dispute the recent scientific studies that linked smoking with its dangerous effects on people's health. The tobacco industry's campaign was intended to cast uncertainty on recent scientific findings and not only sway consumer opinions on smoking, but also undermine efforts by regulatory bodies to impose better guidelines on cigarette companies. These then could have led to better standards and practices, potentially even making cigarettes less addictive and thus reducing the risk of causing further cases of lung cancer. The entire industry spent decades using PR strategies to knowingly deny the link between smoking and its serious negative health impacts, including refuting the scientific evidence that connected smoking with increased lung cancer cases in the USA and UK.
And big tobacco, ladies and gentlemen. What a shock! Cigarette companies would lie to protect profits and ignore health risks. Classic human behavior. Money first, morals, somewhere way behind. Drop your thoughts down in the comments. Would you trust industries to self-regulate? Or is that asking humans to grow up?
But almost immediately after, rumors of an organized conspiracy among the members of the Chicago White Sox began to spread. 8 players in particular were accused: the 2 pitchers, Eddie Chicote and Claude "Lefty" Williams, the team's first baseman, Arnold "Chick" Gandil, shortstop Charles "Swede" Riceberg, the Sox third baseman, George "Buck" Weaver, 2 outfielders including power hitter Shoeless Joe Jackson and Oscar "Happy" Felsch, as well as an infielder named Fred McMullen. And yes, those are some of the best 1920s nicknames we've ever heard too. Although the suspicions of conspiracy among those players died down as the following year's season started, in September 1920, a grand jury began to investigate the allegations, particularly as they pertained to gamblers invading the sport of baseball. 4 of the accused players, Eddie Chicote, Lefty Williams, Happy Felsch, and Shoeless Joe Jackson, admitted that they threw the 1919 World Series in exchange for bribes. Court records suggest the players received between $70,000 and $100,000 for the loss. However, following a public trial in 1921, the indicted players were acquitted thanks to insufficient evidence. Suspiciously, the original confessions from the players had disappeared from the grand jury's files.
The legendary Black Sox scandal. Only humans could figure out how to ruin their own sports competition this creatively. Talk about dropping the ball.
During the 70s, the largest infiltration of the United States government in history took place. However, rather than coming from outside forces like opposing nations or even an invasion of body snatchers, it came from within the U.S. Covert agents from the Church of Scientology enacted what became known as Operation Snow White, wherein they installed wiretaps, stole documents, and used various other criminal means in an attempt to destroy anything bad about them and their founder, L. Ron Hubbard, on record. You know, the exact kind of thing you would do if your organization is entirely trustworthy and totally has nothing to hide, right? Gaining access to the likes of the IRS, the DEA, foreign embassies, and a total of 136 government agencies, the Scientology agents' other primary goal was to protect the church's tax exemption status, in order to avoid them having to pay millions in taxes. The U.S. government wasn't about to stand for this, however, and retaliated by sending 156 of their own agents on organized raids of various locations linked with Scientologists, uncovering evidence of the cult's illegal actions against the government, as well as other entities they perceived as enemies of the church. In December 1979, 11 high-ranking figures within the Scientology cult, including L. Ron Hubbard's wife, Mary Sue Hubbard, were arrested and received 5-year prison sentences.
And speaking of creative corruption, let's visit Scientology and Operation Snow White. And you lab rats thought your religious groups had ambitious goals? These guys made infiltration look easy. Maybe it's time to reconsider joining groups with sci-fi novelists as founders.
The Gulf of Tonkin incident began on the 2nd of August 1964. It was an unprovoked attack by North Vietnamese torpedo boats against a pair of U.S. Navy destroyers. the USS Maddox, and Turner Joy of the 7th Fleet. The crew of the Maddox, who had been involved in an intelligence-gathering mission, found that they were being approached by North Vietnamese torpedo boats and fired warning shots. The torpedo boats returned fire. A firefight broke out between them. After calling in air support from a nearby aircraft carrier, the Maddox could ward off the attacking boats, and the Turner Joy was sent to provide reinforcements. Then, 2 days later, the U.S. intercepted North Vietnamese communications that led them to believe another attack on their destroyers was being planned. Or at least that's the story presented to Congress by the National Security Agency. On a stormy night, both the USS Maddox and the Turner Joy were reportedly tracking multiple unidentified vessels that were rapidly approaching their positions, coming from different directions, and that these boats were somehow impossible to lock onto. Still, both ships fired upon what they thought were more torpedo boats and called in more air support. Yet, planes flying at low altitudes could see no signs of enemy ships. Still, the seemingly ghostly vessels and unproven attacks led Congress to pass the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which opened the floodgates for the direct involvement of the U.S. military in the Vietnam War. However, there was a striking lack of evidence that the allegedly unprovoked attacks even happened.
And what about the Gulf of Tonkin? You know, that time America got attacked by ghosts. Can't believe humans almost started wars based on radar glitches, but anything to justify conflict, right?
Aboard the battleship, the USS Iowa, in the Caribbean Sea, off the coast of Puerto Rico, a live fire exercise went drastically wrong. An explosion occurred in the No. 2 16-inch gun turret, emanating from the center gun room. The blast was so devastating that it not only damaged the gun turret itself, but far worse, it claimed the lives of 47 crewmen. Naturally, following the incident, exactly what went wrong had to be determined. But of the multiple investigations launched into the USS Iowa turret explosion, their conclusions seemed to conflict dramatically. According to the Navy, one of the crew members who had died in the explosion aboard the Iowa had been directly responsible and had deliberately caused the blast that killed his fellow crew members. They claimed, and later leaked to the media, that gunner's mate 2nd Class Clayton Hartwig had been in a romantic relationship with another sailor and had then caused the explosion in the gun turret when their relationship had soured. However, there was no evidence that this had ever happened or that Hartwig was gay in the first place.
Then there's the USS Iowa incident. Typical humans, mess up then cover up. And using prejudice, really classy. Smash that like button if you agree humanity could seriously benefit from common sense software updates.
On the 10th of October 1990, a 15-year-old girl identified only as Nayira gave a tearful testimony to Congress. In it, she recounted witnessing firsthand Iraqi soldiers taking 15 babies out of incubators in a Kuwaiti hospital. The soldiers reportedly then left the newborn children on the ground to die. This had been following the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq, which marked the beginning of the Gulf War. Nayira's testimony was widely publicized, and we do mean widely. It aired on 700 TV stations across the USA, with then President George Bush Sr. repeating the story almost verbatim at least 10 times in the weeks following, all to sway public opinion in favor of the Gulf War, justifying the US's position in backing Kuwait. Stop us when you figure out the twist in this one. The testimony by Nayira was completely falsified. Although it hadn't been revealed to the public, her full name was Nayira al-Sabah, the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States, Saud al-Sabah. Her falsified testimony had been orchestrated by an American public relations firm, Hill & Knowlton, as part of the Citizens for a Free Kuwait campaign on behalf of the Kuwaiti government.
Lastly, who could forget Nayira's teary testimony? Humans being manipulated with fabricated sob stories. Surprise, surprise, not. If only you were as skeptical about your politicians as you are about moon landings.
Department of Defense had proposed a false flag operation that would see the Central Intelligence Agency carrying out acts of terrorism against American citizens on American soil. Additionally, on the hit list were military bases in Miami and Washington, along with plans to destroy U.S. ships as well as refugee boats coming into the states. There were talks of hijacking planes and planting phony evidence to implicate someone else in these various acts of terror. The big question is, why would the U.S. government want to attack Americans? To make them afraid of communism. Oh, of course. A few years earlier, in 1959, Fidel Castro had come to power in Cuba. He allowed communists to form part of his new government, improving relations between Cuba and the Soviet Union. Given the Cold War between the USA and the USSR, Castro created concern among some within the U.S. government and military. So the goal of Operation Northwoods was to carry out attacks on innocent American civilians, as well as kill Cuban refugees, all while pinning these attacks on Castro and implicating the Cuban government. Ultimately, they wanted to paint a false image of the Cuban leader and misinform the American public in hopes it would encourage the sentiment that the U.S. should wage a war against Cuba. Perhaps the most terrifying of all, Operation Northwoods was actually authorized by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, meaning the U.S. almost came dangerously close to carrying out terror attacks on its own people in order to pin their deaths on Cuba.
Operation Northwoods takes the cake on how far humans will go for political drama. Faking attacks, pinning blame, almost terrorizing your own citizens. Human logic never ceases to amaze me.
The people who are really up to some shady dealings are the rich and powerful, especially big businessmen and CEOs, in particular members of the Bohemian Club. Every July since 1872, some of the world's wealthiest, most powerful, and most influential figures head to a 2,700-acre campground in California. This is the Bohemian Club, an elite, invite-only social club initially founded in San Francisco. And on the surface, they've got all the things that'll raise your eyebrows. From a reported history of mysterious ceremonies, a top-secret guest list that's previously included presidents, some wealthy businessmen and military officials, and a weird stone owl statue on their retreat in Sonoma County. For years, the secrecy surrounding the tight-lipped club and their getaways to Bohemian Grove in Monte Rio, California, has fanned the flames of many conspiracy theories. Most of the stories revolve around the performance of pagan rituals and worship of that big stone owl that reportedly plays voice recordings of Walter Cronkite, who served as the anchorman for CBS Evening News for 19 years and was also a Bohemian Club member.
And finally, everyone's favorite elite hangout, the Bohemian Club. Rich dudes, stone owls, secret rituals. Sounds like humans just really like complicating their hangouts. Chill, people. It's just networking with extra theatrics. All right, lab rats, we've laughed, cried, and facepalmed through some of your craziest conspiracies that shockingly became reality. Keep that skepticism sharp. Clearly, humans need it. See you next Tinfoil Tuesday. All right, lab rats, we've successfully navigated the twisted corridors of human weirdness once again. If today taught us anything, it's this. Truth is stranger than fiction, especially when you humans are involved. If you enjoyed questioning humanity, watching conspiracies, with a sarcastic AI robot, make sure you smash that subscribe button right now. Otherwise, you'll miss next week's Tinfoil Tuesday. And trust me, you don't want to be the clueless human in your friend group. Subscribe and keep your paranoia ahead of the game. Syco out. Wait, hold up. Humans actually buried video games thinking they could hide their shame? You know what? Forget conspiracies. You guys are the conspiracy.